First of all, welcome and thank you for joining the webinar. Here at Cola Life, we have been guided by a set of principles that help us ensure that the change that we help to create is self-sustaining. And by that we mean the change is permanent and outlives the period of our engagement. We've developed these principles in the context of being a catalyst for change in the global south, so essentially a foreign body in an overseas country. In this webinar, we will explore if there is value in these principles to test whether planned COVID-19 initiatives, of which there are many, will be effective, or if they're already running, whether they can be used to improve the impact that these COVID-19 initiatives have. I just wanted to introduce myself a bit before we start. Oh, let's first of all, we've split this presentation into 5 sections. The first 4 sections are me talking, introducing myself, talking about what problem we were trying to solve, what we actually did, and then moving on to the core of the presentation, which is these self-sustaining principles that we've developed. Then I'll switch over to you to ask questions, and hopefully we'll have at least half an hour for questions at the end. First of all, what is Cola Life? Well, first of all, Cola Life is not a social business. We're described as social entrepreneurs, but we are not running an enterprise. We exist to change the system so that fewer people or fewer children die or are stunted by diarrhea around the world. Legally, we're registered as a UK charity. There are 2 full-time workers and 1 part-time. I'm obviously one of those full-time people. We have 6 voluntary trustees, and we are independent, totally independent despite our name. We have no formal links with Coca-Cola. Our field work was carried out in Zambia, but we are having a global impact. This is the team. That's me. Jane is my partner in life and in Cola Life. And we are the 2 full-time people behind Cola Life. And then we have Rohit, who works with us part-time. He's a doctor of public health, so brings in the health expertise, and has also done all of our monitoring evaluation work. He's based in Canada. So what is a problem we're trying to solve? Well, it's this, that child mortality is unbelievably high in developing countries. And what's interesting or alarming is what children die from. 19% of under 5 deaths are due to diarrhea, and that is as many as those that die from malaria and AIDS put together. Malaria and AIDS you hear a lot about, you hear very little about diarrhea. It kills 1 child every minute. But it's not just about mortality. 40% of the children around the world are stunted at the age of 2, which means that they will suffer permanent effects on both their physical and mental development and will never reach their full potential. But we know how to treat diarrhea, and we've known how to treat diarrhea for more than 3 decades. The current recommendation is actually 16 years old, and it is that children are given oral rehydration salts together with zinc. Both are cheap to produce and stable at ambient temperatures. The problem is that 90% of children don't get this treatment. So the problem is access to the treatment. We know what the disease is, we know how to treat it. The remaining issue is getting access to the treatment. And so that's what our work focused on. So what did we do? Well, we observed, first of all, that Coke gets everywhere. Wherever you go, you will find Coca-Cola, even in the most remotest parts of the world. And everyone has a story about they were in this amazingly remote place and they could buy a Coke. Everyone knows it gets everywhere. But at the same time, while community shops are fully stocked with the things that people want, including Coca-Cola, right next door in the public health clinic, they will struggle, even just to keep the basic medicines, essential medicines in stock all the time. So we set about studying how the Coca-Cola system worked, and we then redesigned a kit that delivered the WHO, that 16-year-old recommendation for treatment, and made it attractive, aspirational, just like Coca-Cola is, so that there was demand for it. And people like this retailer, when he came into the district town, would buy the diarrhea treatment kit. You can see on the back of his bicycle there, along with eggs and washing powder and biscuits and all the rest of it. This went out to hundreds of shops and still continues to do so, and is also available nationwide in the supermarkets. We spent 2.5 years, oh sorry, let me go back one. We spent 2.5 years setting up a trial in Zambia, and then when that trial was successful, using these small retailers outlets for the medicine, we went into scale up. We left Zambia in June 2014. We've been full-time in Zambia up until then for 2.5 years. And then we continued with short visits, basically 1 month every quarter through to September 18. Kit Yamoyo is now owned by a Zambian manufacturer, and is being manufactured locally with no intervention from Cola Life. By the end of, this is the very simple and straightforward assembly line for the kit. By the end of 2019, end of last year, 1.2 million kits had left the factory in Lusaka, this factory, and the Zambian government is now the largest customer for the kit. So this manufacturer produced a government branded version of the kit. It's exactly the same as the commercial version, but with different branding specifically for the government, and that is now given out free of charge in government clinics. The key thing to note here is this local manufacturer is producing the product for the market. They are not producing it for us. This means that the whole system that we help create can be self-sustaining. As things became embedded in Zambia, we moved on to consider how our work might have a global impact. And after a false start, we settled on trying to change the global recommendation for diarrhea treatment so that it explicitly stated that the ORS and zinc should be co-packaged, because that is the transformation, that's the innovation. After more than a year's work on this, our application to change the WHO essential medicines list was submitted to WHO in November 2018, and in July 2019, WHO produced their revised essential medicines list, adding co-packaged ORS and zinc as the recommended treatment for diarrhea. This is a complete game changer for us and moves our work out of the innovation box and into the mainstream of global health. So countries now won't be asking, shall we try out this cool idea of co-packaging ORS and zinc? The question they'll be asking themselves is, how do we implement this new global recommendation. You can see there the entry as it is now in the essential medicines list. So what have we learned from this in terms of ensuring that the change that we created or helped create outlived our involvement, outlived our presence in Zambia? The foundation is of our approach is that ultimately the change we create has to be self-sustaining. We are not interested in change that is temporary. We want to change the system. And that really defines all the other steps. So that means that we have to plan. If you want something to outlive your involvement, you have to plan for that right from the outset. So many projects get 2 or 3 years in, and then there's a massive pressure to come up with an exit strategy, with a year or so to run. That is not a plan for self-sustainability. That is a plan for cutting and running. If you want your work to be self-sustaining, you must plan for that right from the very beginning. The first rule then in our approach is that we must not do anything that makes us a permanent part of the solution. This is the first key principle, and it essentially defines everything else. If you allow yourself to become a part of the solution, then by definition, when you leave, part of the solution will leave too. And it's alarming how many development projects fall into this trap, always with at least 2 serious negative consequences. Firstly, the change that they created while they're operational isn't sustained. So it's as if they weren't there, but it isn't quite as if they weren't there, because the second thing that happens in this situation is that while operational, this temporary engagement will have undermined and weakened the capacity of local organizations who have the long-term responsibility for creating and sustaining the desired change. So many initiatives go in and set up parallel systems and weaken the local systems that are there and have the long-term responsibility to do what they're doing short-term. And this is probably the biggest problem with initiatives that don't plan for their own demise, for self-sustainability. The next thing is that, well, if you can't become part of the solution, then you have to work through local organizations and processes where these local organizations and processes lack capacity or direction or strength, then you should work to help refine or improve them. Above all, you must not set up parallel systems if you want the change you create to be self-sustaining. So it follows that you need to work in partnership with local stakeholders. However, it's important that these partnerships are formed and operate in the right way. It's important that these partnerships are formed around a shared vision and not around an organization, not around you or an individual. If partnerships are built around an individual organization or individual person, then they will collapse when that organization or that person goes away. When this method of forming partnerships is successful, it promotes engagement, it ensures shared ownership of the vision, and helps ensure that partnerships will survive the departure of any single member. It's also important that your funders are part of this partnership as well. that they're subscribed to the vision and they are engaged in the process. We call these partnerships that are built around a vision, smart partnerships. These were the organizations involved, or at least some of them, involved in our work at the outset, in the trial phase. And we pulled all of these organizations around this shared vision of saving lives through better access to ORS and zinc. You'll notice that Cola Life, our organization, is not in this picture. And that's because we are the strings that pull this together. We are, or were, a temporary organization. We were not going to be a long-term partner in Zambia. So we are not in this network. We just catalyzed it and pulled the people together around this vision. That was our job. And then a few other things which are also really important. It's important to respect local policies. It's no point in operating for a short period of time outside of local government policy, because as soon as you go, you'll have nowhere, your activity will have nowhere to sit. So you have to respect local policies. You may think local policies are wrong or need updating or whatever, and that may be the case, but you shouldn't, your response should not be to go around them, it should be to try and change them. So put your effort into working locally to improve local policies. Don't put your effort into working around them, because if you do that when you go, your activity will have nowhere to sit and will not be sustainable. The other key thing is make sure you are doing what people actually want. Now, this is pretty obvious. It's much better to proceed on the basis of what you know people want rather than on what you think they need. And unfortunately, so many initiatives work on the basis of what somebody thinks someone else needs. And usually that's wrong. You have to speak to your target group, your beneficiaries, before you do anything. You have to check that what you think they need is actually what they want. And a guide is that you should talk to 100 beneficiaries before you do anything. Now that may sound like a massive task, but you could do it, depending on what you're doing, you could speak to 100 beneficiaries in a couple of days. But you must go through that process. Even if you think, even if you're totally convinced that you know what they want, you have to speak to them, because the chances are your perception of what they want isn't correct, or at least will need fine tuning. We went into Zambia thinking we knew what caregivers wanted in terms of diarrhea treatment. And it wasn't until we spoke to them that we really started learning, and it massively redefined the detail of what we did. And finally, and this is probably the most difficult thing for many organizations, is be invisible. There is the urge on the part of many donors and development agencies is to brand everything they fund or support, and that is a mistake. It must be resisted, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is the original billboards that we used when we went into Scale Up in Zambia. You'll notice that Cola Life's branding is nowhere to be seen on the product. It's not on the billboard. In fact, the beneficiaries of our work didn't even know we existed. The Ministry of Health knew we existed, the manufacturers knew we existed, the people in that partnership knew we existed, but the beneficiaries, the retailers and the distributors, the wholesalers did not know Cola Life existed. And that's how it should be. Because if you brand your activities, then it completely changes the perception of what it is you're doing. Later, obviously we learned this as we went along. And towards the end of our scale up, USAID offered to help promote Kit Yamoya, our product. But they insisted that they put their branding on the materials, and this was a massive mistake. Not only did it mess up the billboard completely in terms of layout and everything, it completely changed the perception of what Kit Yamoya was. All of a sudden, it looked like it was something from outside. It looked like it was a result of a foreign effort, which is, and so all sorts of complications come into here. People that look at that second poster and think, well, if it's being given to Zambia, why do we have to pay for it? And all sorts of complicated things. But it's a big mistake, and you have to avoid it. Make yourself invisible. Now, I'd like to finish just by thanking all the people who have contributed to this. We couldn't have done it without them. As you can see, we've had a really broad support group behind us to do this, so we certainly can do this by ourselves. Now, what I'd like to do is stop there and switch this share off so I can see you guys and ask if you've got any questions. And I'm particularly interested in how you think these self-sustaining principles might help to, if you like, screen and make COVID-19 initiatives more relevant and more effective. So let me just switch this screen off and see if anyone's still there. You are. Thank you for that. Jane is here at this point. She's that other person on that slide. I'm going to actually move it onto the other screen so we look like we're looking at you. Please fire away with any questions and challenges. I mean, maybe you don't agree with what we've said, and maybe it's only applicable to overseas aid. I don't think so personally, but anyway, fire away with the questions.
Hey, Simon.
Hi, Louis.
How are you doing? Thanks for that. I just had a question. So on the branding point, right? I mean, I understand the principle behind it, and I completely agree that it's in order to make something appear local is like a very important part. Practically, though, how do you get around that discussion with donors, or do you just basically accept that you need to go to other donors?
Well, first of all, a couple of things. You said appear to be local. Generally speaking, it is local, and by branding it, you make it appear that it's not local. So that's the first point. The other thing is there are things you can do, like if you're going to a donor that you know is going to want to put their brand on everything, you ask them for all the stuff that doesn't need branding. So they put money into stuff that doesn't, so they don't put any money into t-shirts or advertising, but they do, you can ask them to fund other things, which is very difficult to brand, or at least brand. That's the first point. So you don't have to completely ignore them. The other thing, so then you would involve, you would pull funding in from, say from foundations or from other sources for the advertising, for the t-shirts, so you could, that's one way of doing it without actually completely cutting out a lot of donors. But really, if we're into system change, we need to change this. We need to change the donors. They shouldn't be insisting on this because it may make them feel good, but they have to educate, because I mean they're doing it because they're using taxpayers' money often, and they've got to justify the existence of taxpayers. But they need to educate the taxpayers. This is why We are not splashing a gift from the American people or a gift from the UK over everything. We're not doing it because it actually undermines what you want us to do in these. You want us to.
Also, I think one could be clear with donors about why you're doing something. One doesn't have to be confrontational and foot stampy about it. And we found that if you are very clear, look, this is a product which we are giving the intellectual property when we've got it right together. We're going to give the intellectual property to a local manufacturer. So, you know, it's counterproductive to have aid branding on a product which is going to be sustainable in the market. And that also can apply to a service. However, you could say that the educational materials, that some of the awareness could be branded, for example. But it's just, this goes back to this thing about, you know, think before you act. And we learned this morning, think before you think before you act, because how you think about it is actually going to affect exactly how you frame it. And I think you can bring a good funder along with you and make sure they have their eye on the main prize. And let's face it, the main prize is not that everybody recognises the DFID logo or the USAID logo. That is not the main prize.
And the other thing is, just to finish on this point, we did persuade DFID, because their default position is everything needs to be branded as DFID. That's the Department for International Development in the UK, for those who are not familiar. We did convince them, using these arguments, that stuff was not to be branded. So we received DFID money, but no DFID branding went on. So USAID we found difficult. But DFID, we were able to persuade using these arguments. Another question, perhaps? Yes, Christine, can you unmute yourself?
I'm going to do that right
Okay.
now. Hi. So this has really been so interesting for me, Simon, because I didn't actually know what you were going to talk about, but I've myself worked in Zambia for 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
And so we really pioneered solar and wind-up radios and implemented them from 2000 onwards in a national radio education program called Learning at Taonga Market, because HIV and AIDS, which was ravaging the country at the time, had taken 2 teachers for every one that was trained. And so, and still to this day, the majority of Zambia's population are in rural areas. And so all the things that you were talking about, I could really relate to, because our next big initiative has been something called 1,000 Days of Motherhood, which was addressing childhood stunting. And that is through, not just through a radio program, but also we've introduced our MP3 products, whereby the content is preloaded into those areas that don't get a radio signal, as well as broadcasting fees are increasingly expensive and the Ministry of Health won't pay them for community stations and so forth. So there was nothing you said that I actually couldn't relate to. One of my questions is, to what extent did any religious complications or issues interfere or support what you were trying to do? Did you have any mountains to climb over that? I don't exactly know how to phrase it, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Just to say that, we worked mainly through a small local NGO that had a very good understanding of communities in both urban poor areas in the city and in rural areas, and had a good understanding of the culture. And right from the beginning, it was important for those project partners to go out and speak to traditional leaders, you know, from the chief downwards, as well as, you know, tying in with local churches and so on. And you'll remember, obviously, that in Zambia there are so many different sects and churches. And I'll just give a very small example of, especially in remote rural areas, how that can turn against your project if you're not really, really sensitive. and that is our original branding was.
Oh, sorry.
Our original brand. That's Simon getting ever enthusiastic about the music side of it. Our original branding for the product was red, and feedback came back from certain rural areas that people wouldn't touch it because red was the color of the devil.
Yes.
So
yes,
and we just
yeah.
think of.
And that's why it's really important, and that point about consulting with your
people.
Yeah.
And it's not just about what's in the, well, I was the product, but it's about the branding, what it's called, the colors involved,
yes.
that sort of thing. It's all very important.
We
Yes.
also listened to one other point. We also listened to a lot of other people who were bringing products to the market and branding them at the same time as us. So our listening circle, if you like, was really quite wide. And I particularly remember a popcorn which came into Zambia from Zimbabwe. And they were launching it on the market. Everything was ready. The packaging was ready. And somebody thought to point out to them that the name they'd chosen with a Zimbabwean local name actually meant buttocks in one of the Zambian languages.
Yeah.
So it was a packet of buttocks. So one does have to be really, really sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, we always had to do that with our products, with everything. We started first and foremost on the ground with listening groups of women. And that's why our products have never been red. We also launched products at one point that were green, but that was a problem because that was Islam. But blue in Zambia is love. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying with that. And also the problem with branding. It is such an, evil isn't the word, but it is really wrong. And it's a global issue. All the big agencies expect you to do with it. And just as bad as USAID are many of the big NGOs. And the big NGOs, in my opinion, excuse me if any of you are on a call right now, but many of the big NGOs are as much as a problem as they are of any solution. They always know more than you, or they act like they do, especially if you're smaller and really local. They guard their relationships very, very fiercely. So yeah, and I don't want to take up any more of the call. So perhaps you and I can, we all can have a separate conversation on this. But the only other thing that I wanted to ask is, to what extent did you involve local media, local community radio stations to also support your message?
Well, here we are. We used a local band who was the best. They were the best. What do they call it? I forget. I'm not very up to date with terminology, but big band, like this dance band in Zambia, who did this for us.
When diarrhea strikes, act fast. Children need quick and effective treatment. Use Zambia's award-winning Kitiam oil. It stops dehydration and gives strength. Available in ShopRite stores countrywide and selected shops. Kitiam oil delivers World Health Organization's recommended treatment for diarrhea. ORS and zinc. Be wise. Be prepared. Beat diarrhea. Buy Kitiam oil today.
And that was done in all the local languages.
Great.
So it was Zambia's award-winning kit. That's
yes.
what it says in the clip. It belongs to Zambia, and the local supermarket used to put up signs, well, probably still do, we're not there now, saying proudly Zambian. And they used to have a week where they will focus on Zambian products. And so this is seen right up to the Ministry of Health as a Zambian product. I think that's really important.
Next question. Thank you for that, Christine. Come on, someone must disagree with this whole approach, surely.
The hand isn't going up because I disagree. Okay, let's just start that off. Thanks, Jen and Simon. I found it really, really interesting. There's a couple of things that are almost sort of observations rather than questions. I've been involved in figuring out and using models of how innovations get into an environment and diffuse and become successful. And as you were talking through, I was mapping it onto different models and different approaches. And I think there's a really potentially very, very helpful piece of work to do to do that and sort of formalize it as an approach, because I think what you're doing has elements of all sorts of different approaches in it, about getting into the local environment, about actually focusing on what is broken that needs to be fixed now and fixing that with a simple single solution. There's lots of points that come out of it. The principles of it, I think, are really important. And the other thing that you said very early on, which really hit home with me, is this notion that what you're doing is looking to help fix a problem and not to own it as a product and make revenue streams coming out of it forever, but actually to really solve the problem. And I think that as an intent at the outset is really, really important in what you've done, because sometimes that's not so easy to do. And you end up getting locked into keeping the thing going because you need to, rather than because it's the right thing to do. There's a fancy pants word for that in strategic thinking stuff, but which I'll leave for another time. But there is a fancy pants word for it, where you actually keep the thing alive when really you should let it go if you're really trying to do what you need to do. And that's to do with integrity. And what's come through in your presentation to me is the integrity of your approach all the way through, starting from the beginning, declaring it, and then actually sticking to it. I'm really impressed.
Well, what's quite interesting is, I mean, this sounds amazing, but it was only a couple of weeks ago that a thing that had been niggling me for many years with this label of being a social entrepreneur. When someone comes up to you and says, hey, you know, you're pitched as that you're this social entrepreneur, and they come up to you and they say, what do you do? And we say, well, we raise lots of money and we spend it on transforming access to diarrhea around the world. Yes, but what do you do? You know, they come to you expecting you as a social entrepreneur to have an enterprise of some sort, which, you know, makes money and saves children in the world. And I was pointed to a presentation literally 2 weeks ago through Catalyst 2030, actually, making the point that social enterprise is not just about social business. Social enterprise is also about changing the system. And in fact, that's probably more important than setting up yet another social enterprise. I mean, I admire people who set up social businesses because it's really difficult to make a profit and at the same time have a big social impact. But we're not doing that. We are not a business. We're always under pressure to raise money from each kit sold in Zambia, but that wouldn't
take a cut.
It would take a cut. It would increase the price, and it's really sensitive on price, and it wouldn't actually improve our impact. So we're not in the business of growing the enterprise. We're not in the business of growing Cola Life to make that bigger and better and more sustainable. In fact, we're going to close it down in 2 years' time. What we're in the business of is the impact, growing and scaling the impact. And if you focus ruthlessly on that, you essentially follow these self-sustaining principles, but you know.
And you leave a change system behind. And none of this is to say that setting up a social enterprise is wrong or a bad thing. And in fact, if you can get like a model which can be locally owned, which can create income for local people and so on, that there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just that we were very clear from the beginning that what we were trying to solve and what we were coming in to fix could be done already by the local partners that were there. There was already 4 manufacturers in Zambia who were perfectly capable of creating this. They didn't have the packaging expertise, they didn't have the branding expertise, they didn't have the research know-how. There were certain things they lacked, but they were there and this was their job. And one of them came on board with us right from the beginning on the understanding that we would learn from each other, and they already knew a lot about the market, the local market, obviously that's their job. And so they've ended up with a product as their product in Zambia, not in the world, obviously, because it's open source. So any other manufacturer anywhere else in the world can also take the same design, rebrand it appropriately, price it appropriately, distribute it appropriately in their own country. And that's what we're working towards now.
I mean, just to reinforce that, my comment wasn't that social business is bad, not at all. my comment was sparked by the fact that I kept feeling uncomfortable when I knew people wanted to hear about a social business when they asked me that question, what do you do? And I felt embarrassed that, in a sense, that I wasn't running some sort of money-making business. There are many good social businesses and they do fantastic work and they're great. It's just not what we do.
I'd just like to pick up on what you were saying, actually, Jane. Oh.
Go on, Ian.
I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying, Jane, because when I said before, as you were going through your slide deck and you talk, I was mapping it onto different ways of innovations and how they diffuse. One of the things is if you want to get across into a large environment, I don't want to call it a market, but you want to get across into a large environment, you have to deliver what in product terms is called a whole product, which is the minimum level of products and services to solve a mission critical process that's broken. And what you just described, Jane, was you had the ideas, they could make it, but they couldn't figure out how to put the whole thing together, and actually putting the whole thing together so that you buy one thing which actually solves the problem. But to do that, you've got to have the manufacturing, the distribution channels, the branding, the pharmaceutical capabilities, blah, 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 blah. And actually, that seems to be what you're doing, is not just to take an idea, but helping the local environment develop that whole thing to say, right, just that. If you just do that in its entirety, you will actually solve the problem. And if you do that, it then grows rapidly.
I mean, our starting point was that there was already, the policy was in place in Zambia, the regulator was there, the manufacturers were there, distributors were there, retailers were there, customers were there.
The NGOs skilled in passing on these messages to their communities, they were already there.
So, and this is
just
not
needed
this
joining
is
up.
Exactly, joining up in perhaps a slightly different way, around a different vision. But the point is that in most circumstances, most stuff is already there. It just needs a little bit of help and needs reorganizing. So that's our approach. Shall we move on to another question?
Yes, and I have to go in a few minutes. So thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us, Ian.
I would just like to make a comment.
Yeah.
I've been involved with Cola Life for years, and I also fund a lot of social enterprises, both in sub-Saharan Africa and around the world. And I would say that Jane and Simon's approach not only has probably, and this is my opinion, and I have colleagues that I work with, but I think a number of them probably share my view, has been the most impactful of anything that I do. I am an impact investor. I run a family office that does exclusively impact investing. And I think two of the things that we really value and what Cola Life does is, first of all, bang for your buck. They are the most lean and efficient organization that we have ever worked with. And the fact that they don't have a product and they aren't your conventional social entrepreneurs that actually have a conventional business model has liberated them in ways that, both from my perspective, has caused them to find it quite challenging to raise really basic funding, first of all, because I think impact investors don't understand the concept of actually people who are working with systems change and who are more catalysts rather than trying to grow a business. But I also think that, ironically, impact investors are constantly talking about systems change, but because of the way they fund things, they're really just funding entities and enterprises that are working within conventional systems and that aren't really trying to challenge those. That goes from the fact that all along Simon and Jane have been completely open source. This is very rare with entrepreneurs to be open source, because they're competing with other entrepreneurs rather than sort of looking to catalyze what is already there. The other thing that I think is really critical is when you were talking about how vital market research is, and to kind of see what people want and what people need, even though, sort of these enterprises have been, impact investors and social entrepreneurs have been working in sub-Saharan Africa for years. Like, for example, energy access, which is a huge thing. And we have been invested in energy access for going on 10 years, there was very little consultation initially with the users, particularly in remote rural areas. Anyway, I've said too much, but I really think that the kind of approach that Jane and Simon use is invaluable and should be transferable to other initiatives beyond healthcare and medicines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, Christine.
A point and a question. What I'm really feeling very strongly, and I think Diane alluded to that as well, which is so seldom mentioned really in our sector overall, is our values. And if you're entrenched in your values early on and stick to them no matter what, then you have a much greater chance, I think, of succeeding overall and not compromising them. And it is so difficult to do that because of donor pressure, probably being the biggest one, the competition, how, you know, the compromises that you often have to make along the way. So I think that that's come through really strongly in your presentation, which is great. But how would you advise or discuss, since we're living in this crazy time right now of COVID-19, how can your approach be used to bring, would it be a vaccine? Would it be information? We have a way that we want to approach, a new way to approach bringing information to people about COVID-19. So after this, perhaps we can have a discussion around that, using audio information. But how would you use what you've done for the next phase of this pandemic?
That is a tough one.
Are there
I think
lessons?
the starting point, I think you basically said the key things. The starting point is to have a very clear vision about what it is you're trying to do. And in fact, if I can tell you a little anecdote on that, we started off, we don't talk about it anymore because it's not relevant, but we started off with the idea of putting medicine in Coke crates. So we did the first kit that we designed actually went in between the bottles, in between the necks of the bottles, in that space there. And the idea, what the logic was, well, Coke gets everywhere. So if the medicines were in the crates, that would get there too. And that everyone got really excited about that. We had a fantastic image.
Globally.
You know, we had 8,000 people on a Facebook group. You know, donors got behind it, media. We won design awards.
Marketing people. It was described as the best hack of a brand.
Yeah, we won the
ever.
top packaging award in the United States, and so on and so forth. 6 months later, we've thrown it out because the trial showed that putting the kits in the crates, although it was a cool idea, wasn't important. What was important was all the other stuff that we had learned from Coke, like the importance of product design, the importance of affordability, the value chain, and so on. So that's what made it work. And so we did, literally, overnight we ditched it. But that night, that overnight, was a very difficult overnight because we had put ourselves up to do this. And that's where all our support come from the West anyway. So we had to make a decision about what we're going to do. And that what made it easy was having the vision, and there's and going back to that and being true to that. And there was a guru, a business guru called Stephen Covey, and he said the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing for us was saving children's lives by getting this diarrhea treatment. It wasn't about having a cool design that fitted in a Coke crate. Anyway, to go back to your main point, so it's about being clear what it is you're trying to do. The second thing is, for us, is look at what's already there. You know, you'd be surprised what's already happening. And, you know, there may be something that isn't there right now, but was there 2 or 3 years ago, but somehow got lost.
And if you're looking at the you know, developing countries, then I think in some ways they have been more nuanced in their approach to COVID. I mean, let's hope that it stays that way. Slightly ahead of the curve maybe because of their experience with things like Ebola. And so there must be, in these many countries, lots of activities and lessons to be learned from Ebola. And although it's obviously not the same thing, there are differentiators with COVID, because Ebola, you know, you've got it straight away. It's not quite so contagious, although it's just as deadly or more deadly.
I think it's quite contagious.
There must be lessons and operations and communications and ways of working which could be, you can listen to, which could be harnessed and harvested, and which could be transferable over.
Yeah, and be humble, you know, who knows? Well, often, you know, local people know more than you do. I mean, I remember talking about Ebola, when we were going in and out of Zambia, at that time, you know, our temperature was checked with a gun as we came into the airport. Even where the temperature was taken to one side.
And then you return to the UK, as we did recently from Europe, and you just walk straight through.
Yeah.
So
that's very true.
Clear vision. So go back to your question. I think it's about being really clear about what you're doing. Look at local experience, what's already there, and before that, you might say, well, actually, to do what we want to do, what do we need? And you know what, and you'll be amazed what's already there. It may not be operating exactly how you would like it to operate, so you work with what's there to help modify it, to support it in some sort of change. But this idea that, you know, you can fix this problem for these people is just, you know,
dangerous.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, and I think also in Zambia, even though they've not had any recorded Ebola cases, they have had polio, leprosy, and HIV and AIDS in a very big way.
Yeah, exactly.
And so people are used to health campaigns. They are accustomed to certain levels of tracking and divulging information. And I think they've been fairly successful, local ministries of health and NGOs on that front. So it's also a little concerning to me that there's still a lot of big brother from over here in some Western country with all their solutions for what these African countries need to do. And it just feels so offensive. It feels so offensive.
Yeah. I was reading this morning, and obviously I haven't looked into this, so I'm saying this carefully. One can look at some of the bottom-up feelings that are now occurring in the USA in certain communities. The resistance to changing their health activities. They don't want to be locked down. They don't want to be told what to do. They have their beliefs which are very entrenched. So in some ways, we have in the past attributed that sort of difficulty in dealing with humans. We've attributed that to developing countries. Who we just need to sensitize them, is the word to use. Sensitize them and educate them, and they don't know. But this is not something which is particular about the Global South, because we're now seeing that sort of resistance to health messaging in North America, or certain communities in North America. And I think that's something that we could learn from. Obviously, it's a very sensitive area, but I think we could look at that and say, well, actually, what is happening in North America? Why are those difficulties occurring with the messaging, with, trying to get people to understand what behaviors they need to change and why the government is asking them to change those behaviors, and why are they resisting? And is there something that we can learn about what's happened in the Global South, where people, as you say, are now more open to being told, look, you have to do this and you have to do that. And poverty may prevent them from doing that, but there isn't, I don't think, the resistance now to that idea that you do need to listen to health experts and change your behavior as far as you can.
We're running out of time, although we could stay here all day talking about this, so don't run away. Any other questions? Are we done? Oh, Rolf, please.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, my name is Rolf. I half Norwegian, half Italian. I'm stuck in Spain right now for 4 years. so it's a choice. It's not so bad. Thanks for the great speech you had. And sorry I came in late. I was on a call. Anyway, I have one question which you probably covered before I came in, but I want to ask it anyway. I am participating in a hackathon this week with MIT for coping COVID-19, and our main focus is energizing healthcare. We have some solutions which we would like to implement throughout Africa, and we have tried to get in contact with the larger organizations for quite a while. It's like Christine said, it's difficult. It's like a block. So I just wanted to hear a little more about how you manage, and what tips to get in, through the blocks.
Right, well, we had this same issue because we wanted to get Coca-Cola's attention, and we were two people, and obviously two people did not have the power to break down the door and get to the right people, the decision makers in Coca-Cola. So what we did is we created this was, not necessarily, but I'll tell you what we did, and you can take principles from it. But we set up a Facebook group. And it was something like This was
in 2008, so it was ages ago, before Facebook was Facebook.
And the title was, let's talk to Coca-Cola about saving children's lives, because we couldn't talk to them. And there's a picture of the Coke crate with the medicines inside it and all that, and it really got people going, and that gave us the power, the soft power that we needed to get into Coke. And we didn't do it directly, we did it through the BBC. So having got this movement going online, we then, I went onto the BBC's website and started asking them to debate this idea. And they didn't, and I did it 3 times and nothing happened. The 4th time, I contacted everyone I knew whose name wasn't Berry, and said, look, I'm going to put this idea that we should debate this online on this forum. Please pile in and say it's a good idea, which they did. And sure enough, it got onto national radio, and it was 20 minutes long. And it was the BBC that pulled in the head of stakeholder relations from Coca-Cola to make a statement. We could never have done that. The BBC can. And that's where the relationship with Coca-Cola started. So you need power of some sort to engage with these big organizations.
Yeah.
And with social media these days, you can get that power by gathering people around your idea. So it's not your idea. You may seed it, but it's the network that gets behind the idea. And then all of a sudden, it's not you saying, let's talk about this. It's 1,000. In our case, it's 8,000 people saying, come on, Coke. We want your view on this.
These days, these are the 8,000, these very small numbers these days. But what we really, before, ahead of the curve, we actually managed to make something go viral. So I think and now we're very conscious of the idea of going viral, with ideas as well as the current issues. No pun intended. But I think if you can convene people around a very simple message or idea, and use the inclusivity, let's do this, or, can we, look at this together, rather than, this is our idea, we're standing over here and guarding it with our lives. If you can do that and get inclusion happening very quickly around an idea, people convening around an idea, you'll actually get somewhere.
Also, it gives you the power, but also it improves the idea.
Yes.
Because the knowledge is in the network. You may think an idea pretty much never works if one person thinks of it and polishes it and shines it and comes out and presents it to the world. That never works. You need to be more open, share your idea, get buy-in, and that obviously improves the idea, but it also gives you the power, or is one way of getting the power that you need to engage with these very powerful, bigger players.
I'd also say be careful about how big a player you want to go or you want to move, because we have to think about, dinosaurs and mammals, if you like, or oil tankers and the small boats of the Dunkirk So we couldn't persuade Save the Children, although we presented to them many times. We couldn't bring them on board to go with Coca-Cola. Christine's waving her arms in the air. UNICEF, we eventually, through our work in Zambia, got them on board, but very, very uncomfortable about the fact we were also talking to Coca-Cola. And really the big boys took a long time to come on board behind us. We were much more successful with the small to medium players.
Although we did get Coke.
We did get Coke.
And they taught, they taught us all we know. We went on initially saying, and the thing was, can we put this medicine in your crates? That's where the conversation started. And, towards the end, they were saying, well, you can if you want, but actually the value chain is what it's all about.
What's the value chain?
And, and what's the product, what's the product design, and, et cetera, et cetera. So it was all that stuff that we learned in the process of talking to them that was important. We had no formal link with them, no contract, but we used to meet with them virtually like this,
Look for a maverick. Within Coca-Cola, we found a couple of mavericks who were doing their own things in developing countries in Africa, and who would listen. So I think you can't move the whole organization. You can't go through the formal channels. You can convene a lot of help behind you, and you may find some mavericks within an organization who say, yes, that's interesting. I'll see what I can do with that.
What actually did happen was that we did end up with the mavericks, as you say, but initially the link with the BBC, the person we linked with was the global head of stakeholder relations. That's who made the statement on the BBC. So that it was a very formal initial. Mm-hmm. And his advice, very open, went to have lunch with him, very open. It was about, this is what Coca-Cola is doing on the social side. They were working with WWF at the time and Greenpeace. We need to try and find an existing initiative within Coca-Cola that this can go on to. It would have been much more difficult if we'd been trying to make the case for a completely new thread of activity for Coke. So we ended up going in on, some different work they were doing, but similar work about, increasing the social benefit of their activity in Africa. We didn't start a completely new thread.
So push it. I think we're saying publicize as much as possible, get a whole load of people behind you. Many of those people will already be in places where they can make a change. So push at the open doors there, align with what they're already doing, try to find a maverick or somebody who's willing to stick their neck out, a tall poppy, somebody who will make a change within that organization, and also, informally with you. So they're sort of on the edge. We had this idea quite early on that change happens on the edge of things. You can't get in the middle. You can't get to the board, you can't get to the CEO usually, but change happens on the edge. And if you can get that clash of partnerships, if you like, where you're on the edge here and they're on the edge there, and you do things over here and then you move it into the mainstream. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I wish to ask you about how I'm planning to launch this to go viral, because I have set in motion one thing, and I just want to test it with you. What do you think?
Okay.
So a few weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, we were planning to launch just before the pandemic. Time flies, so it must be 7 weeks ago now. Anyway, it was just before the lockdown, which here in Spain was a little more than 6 weeks ago. So we were planning to launch to market a new type of greenhouse. That's one of our products as part of the home to live concept. And the greenhouse is insulated by soap bubbles. It's a very cheap technology in many ways, sadly, because that has been the problem from the inventor's side. To bring it to market is too cheap. So you should think that's a good idea, but sadly, not so easy. That's another story. But anyway, we have embraced this product and we are going to bring it to market. So anyway, we were planning originally for the greenhouse, our agricultural space in the world to produce cheaper food and taking care of food security. Anyway, suddenly we got a response, a request from New York if we could deliver temporary emergency hospitals with the same technology, which we can. We discussed this over the weekend then, the group, the team and I, and we said yes, absolutely. We spoke with engineers, no problem. We can make a hospital deployable to anywhere in the world. So we said, okay, how to get this now out there? How to bring this to the world? So I said, okay, let's do an online music event worldwide with musicians. Why musicians? Not only musicians, but artists of different kind. Because we understood very quickly that artists, musicians, and so on during the lockdown, they would lose their income for quite a long time to come. Events being shut down and so on. So even if there is, possibilities of doing things online, there are so many people doing things online. So it's kind of difficult for them to get through the noise. So we said, hey, why don't we make a online worldwide show for not necessarily the ones which are very, very famous from before, but we're talking about the rest, the hundreds, thousands, the millions of the ones which are skilled in playing things. They are singers, band players, whatever, and they need money. So let's put together a show online combined with the crowdfunding to crowdfund, let's say, an income for them, and at the same time fuel our cost to get our temporary emergency hospitals out there as part of the campaign. So I did, like you said, I connected with people in the US, in Africa, in Trinidad and Tobago, Bermuda, and 80 countries later. Now we have quite a lot of enthusiasts who think this is a great idea, but we need to get to the mainstream media. That has been the toughest part. Now we may get on television in Bermuda and the US, maybe. We are working on this now, so let's cross fingers. But we would very much like to get to BBC and all these other, let's say, mainstream big players who can help us get this message out there. So this is what we are doing now this past week with this Catalyst 2030. It has been a blessing to get in touch with both enthusiasts worldwide, but also influencers. So this is our, let's say, message. Please, if anyone has any contacts with mainstream media who can help fuel now our plan. So that May 24th, if everything goes well, that will be the launch of the campaign. We still have a lot work to do, day and night. So I haven't slept, all week, almost this week. I'm dead tired. And now during this weekend, from tonight till Sunday evening, I'm participating in a hackathon with MIT in the US. Not going to sleep either. So let's wait to sleep until the COVID this thing is contained.
Well, best of luck with that, Rob. I mean, there is very many parallels with what we did. Trying to get a mass of people behind the idea, that gives you the power to then. I mean, the media will be chasing you if this. If the initiative is successful. So
yeah, and I think there are cohorts of audiences that you might want to think of for the music. I'm thinking all of the teenagers in lockdown at the moment. I don't know what kind of music it is, but there might be children can always be very disruptive in a good way sometimes. Teenagers, lots of older people as well, stuck at home, bored. So is there a particular audience whose engagement you could get as well as the musicians? Because the musicians are one side of it; they're giving the performance and carrying the message. But you really need an audience to promote, to own the music, to own the musicians.
Or own the idea
to own the idea, and then to spread it on through their through their networks.
Yes.
So who are those? You know, are they teenagers? Are they children? Are they grandparents? Are they, you know, who might they be? I don't know if that helps.
Anyway, I'm conscious of time here. We've run over and numbers are dwindling. So maybe if you'd like to carry on the conversation, Rob, you know, you've got our contact details, haven't you? And we're in. You're muted.
Oh, please write it in the chat so I can copy.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that now.
Yeah.
All right, so should we call it an end there? I think there's only a very few people left, but let me thank everyone for participating, and
thank you.
Invite people to contact us directly if you want to carry on the conversation. I'll just put my my email in.
You just have to copy it before you go, because if you go, then the chat will be deleted.
No, we're going to save. We're going to save the. There's technical people behind this who are going to save the chat.
Let's save the chat.
So, there you go.
Great. Perfect.
Also, Jane at ColoLife.
Oh yes, sorry, I should have said this. Yeah.
Well,
so,
either.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for the attention also, and thank you for what you're doing. It's great.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.